Today we're starting a project that should take us 2, possibly even to 3 art days, and it involves printing and it involves some stitching, so fibers and printing. So to begin today, we are going to work on the print plate. So that's the surface that we're going to print. So on my final project, it has this design on it, but the design I printed, stamped. So I had to create this plate that has some raised surfaces that would take the ink. So to begin, we are going to take our smaller tracer today, so these are the ones that are at your table. We're going to cut that out on tagboard. So I'm tracing, cutting. I will keep the scraps because that's quite a bit of scraps I can use for something else. So once you have that cut and traced, you are going to create a radial design with shapes on this printing plate. So to begin, I'm going to use this foam that cuts really nice. And I am just going to start to cut some shapes. So I know that radial symmetry has to have a design that goes around in a circle. So I'm going to cut some shapes that are similar today. So there's 4 very similar squares. I'm going to cut as 4 very similar rectangles. And I'm going to start to lay them out in a design. So we want this done first today so that it dries. So maybe they're going to be in the middle. And then maybe around it I have these rectangles. And I'm just going to keep building my design so that it's the same on all sides of that circle. I could have larger shapes, smaller shapes, but those shapes have to repeat. So I am trying to cut some different shapes out on this. Once you have your design laid out, you will have to glue it with white glue today. So definitely this has to be done on day 1. Hopefully it doesn't take you the entire day and you'll have time to start the stitching part. So maybe these are going to come around as well. I think those are pretty big. I might cut them smaller, but I want to fill that circle space. Important today that it is just one layer. So I am not sticking shapes on top of shapes. It has to be the same height so that it prints nicely next time. So radial symmetry with foam shapes, get that glued down, write your name on it, and that's going to go in the drying rack. When you are finished with that, you're on for the stitching part. Okay, beginning the stitching part of this project, you're going to get your own paper bag. And we have to cut the bottom off of this bag. So to do that, I'm going to fold that bottom in half the opposite direction. And I'm going to look at where all those layers are, and I'm going to cut that bottom right at all those layers. And that is just cutting the bottom off of this bag so that it's now open and see-through. I'm going to pick one of the creases to cut on. And this will open my bag up really flat. So I'm going to fold it inside out so that the words, if you have words of your bag, are on the inside. And then I'm going to take that larger circle tracer and I am going to trace while the bag is folded in half. So very circular. And while they're still sandwiched together, I'm going to cut right on that circle. Ignore that bell. All the way around. And now what I have is 2 of the same circles that I will be able to stitch together and print that design on. So I am going to go around the edge of this circle with a push pin, making holes very close together, about a finger space away, all the way around that I will be able to stitch in. So I'm going to do that on this piece of cardboard. And I don't want it to be very close to the edge. I know these are like the same colors. I want it to be in a little bit and then pushing all the way through. And I'm going to go about a finger space away, all the way around that circle, trying to stay the same distance away from the edge. I did not count how many circles this is or how many punches this is, but just know you want them to be about a finger space apart. So if you leave a big space, it's going to be really difficult to stitch. and our filling, what we stuff in this cushion, is going to come out. We want these to be pretty close together. I'm about halfway done, so you kind of get the point of just going around finger space apart. When you're finished, you are going to get a yarn color. So I picked red, so it would show up on this video really well. And Mrs. Cleary will tell you how long this yarn has to be. She's going to measure to make sure you have the right length so you don't have to stop and start with a needle. So we haven't done this yet this year, but your needle is going to go on your yarn. So you can do that 3 ways. You can take your needle and just slide and pull that yarn through. If that's not working for you, my first trick is to fold a little loop in your yarn and twist it. And I like to just slide that yarn back and forth to pull it through. If you are still struggling, my third trick that we have learned is to take that yarn, fold it up in your paper, and then the folded edge of that paper goes through the eye of your needle really fast, and you can pull it through. I would tie your needle on to your yarn. So I make a loop, put that tail through, and pull, and I'm going to do that again to double knot it on. So when I look, my yarn is knotted right onto that needle. Now I'm ready to start stitching. So pretend that I poked holes all the way around that circle. You can pick a spot, any spot to start. And I am going to put my needle down one of those holes. So I'm keeping these together. You know what I just remembered? Before I did my first example, I actually had these taped together. So I'm actually going to have you do that too. Before you poke those holes, I'm going to have you tape these together so that your holes stay lined up. Sorry about that. So once they're cut out, tape them together in 4 spots around the circle, and then you can poke the holes. So now I know those holes are lined up. I'm going to poke my yarn through, and I'm going to pull. And this is really long to begin. Pull, 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 till I have a tiny tail. I am going to knot that on. So just like I knotted my needle on, I'm going to tie a knot once, tie a knot twice, a double knot in my starting spot. We are going to do a whip stitch. So a whip stitch, your needle always goes down and you pull. We did a whip stitch in 2nd grade when we made our Native American bags. So now I'm going down again. My needle's going down, poking through those holes, and I pull. So my yarn is going to stitch the edge of that bag shut and down. I want to show you one thing that some kids do while they're whip stitching. They poke that needle down and they pull, and they end up pulling their needle through the yarn loop. If you do that, it's going to look wrong and you're going to know right away. On the back, it gets tangled. So I'm going to untangle it. I'm just going to follow that yarn backwards. I'll show you how not to do that. So my yarn's down here. I'm going to whip around so my needle's going down. And I pull. Right here, when you're pulling through, you don't want the needle to be between those 2 pieces of yarn. You want the yarn to be on the same side. And when you pull and pull and pull and pull, there's your whip stitch. When you get to those pieces of tape you've put on, pull them off. You don't want to stitch the tape on because it'll be really hard to get it off. So I expect on the first art day that you possibly start a little bit of that whip stitch. Next time we're going to come really close to finishing the whip stitch. We're going to leave a little opening and we're going to print. That printing will dry, and you will possibly be able to finish whip stitching it shut after we've put something in the bag, or we might need a 3rd art day to finish it. So inside this finished cushion, there is a stuffing. There's paper inside here, so that you'll add that as well. And you can see where I finished and started my stitching. I made it all the way around that circle. So this is our Radial Symmetry printed cushion.